This is every offensive player the Pittsburgh Steelers have met with at the NFL Combine. So, the NFL Combine is officially over. All the meetings are wrapped up. Whether that be informal or formal interviews, the NFL Combine is over, meaning all the Steelers interviews are officially over as well. So, teams are allowed to meet with 45 players. It's a rule change that implemented a few years ago that reduced the number from 60 interviews to 45, but it also lengthens the interview time by a few minutes. So the players the Pittsburgh Steelers meet with formally are usually signs of interest. So before I get into the list of players, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more updates like this, turn notifications, and also like the video. Now let's get into the list. So this video is going to be all the offensive players, and tomorrow I'll cover all the defensive players. So to start off, the number of known Steelers formal interview meetings so far are 28. Obviously, you won't know specifically every single person that met with the Steelers unless they kind of announce it in their interviews to the media, and they kind of say to the media, okay, I met with the Steelers, and if they're asked questions about the Steelers, then they give their answer. But if they don't give their answer, then you don't really know for sure. But this is all the formal and informal interviews. So to start off with offense, running back, they met with George Holani from Boise State, and this was an informal interview. Also, they met with Will Shipley from Clemson, informal interview. They also met with Isaac Gariondo from Louisville. So this was an informal interview as well. Before I get more into the list, let me just say this. I'm trying to say all these names correct. Hopefully I pronounce all of them right. I don't know all these players, but let's go back into the list. Moving over to wide receiver. So they only met with 3 running backs, informal or formal, and those 3 were informal. At wide receiver, however, they met with Jalen McMillan from Washington. They also met with Troy Franklin from Oregon. They met with Adandi Mitchell from Texas. They met with Keon Coleman from Florida State. They met with Brian Thompson Jr. from LSU. They met with Rome Onduz from Washington. They also met with Ricky Purcell from Florida. This was an informal interview. They also met with Tez Walker from North Carolina. This was an informal interview. So if I'm not saying it's informal, that means that it was a formal interview. If I'm just saying the player and I'm not saying informal or formal, just assume that it's a formal interview. If I'm saying informal, that means it was not like a proper interview done where they met over dinner or something. So those were all the wide receivers. Just counting them up, they met with 8 total wide receivers, informal or formal. At the tight end position now, they met with Jaheim Bell from Florida State. They met with Theo Johnson from Penn State, informal interview. They met with AJ Barner from Michigan State, informal. They met with Ben Sinnott from Kansas State, informal. They met with Brevin Spanford from Minnesota, informal interview. So those are all the tight ends they met with at the NFL Draft Combine. So they met with 5 total tight ends. Moving over to offensive line now, they met with J.C. Lathan from Alabama. They met with Amarius Mims from Georgia. They met with Graham Barton from Duke. They met with Cedric Van Pran Granger from Georgia. They met with Blake Fisher from Notre Dame. They met with Setoa Lahuma from Utah. This was an informal interview. They also met with Christian Magunny from Boston College, informal interview. They met with Hunter Nazard from Penn State, informal interview. They met with KT Leviston from Kansas State. This was an informal interview. They met with Brooks Limmer from Arkansas, informal interview. They met with Javon Cohen, Miami, informal interview. They met with Kingsley Egunhan from Florida, informal interview. And the last person is Javon Foster from Missouri, informal interview. So those are all the offensive linemen the Pittsburgh Steelers have met with at the NFL Combine, formal or informal. just counting it up really quickly, they met with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 players along the offensive line at the combine. So that was a position that they most looked at in terms of the offense. And this wraps up every single player the Pittsburgh Steelers have met with on the offensive side of the ball at the NFL Combine, formal interview or informal. Now, let's kind of recap everything in terms of this, because you could really tell sometimes based off the players that they interview and they meet with what round they might select these certain positions at. Like if you look at the running back position, the players that they met with, you could tell that they're not really focused on drafting a running back high in this draft, and you wouldn't expect it because they have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. So you would maybe expect in the later rounds of the draft, those lower tier running backs, they're kind of more median with, and players that could fit them later on, or maybe even undrafted. So you look at the running back position, and you could tell that's not a main focus of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But you look at the wide receiver and the players that they interviewed there, and you could tell that they're going to be looking at wide receiver kind of earlier on in this year's draft, and you could see that they're meeting with some of the top players. They met with one guy, Rome, from Washington. That is a high probably prospect and someone who may be selected very early on in this year's NFL draft. They also met with Troy Franklin, someone who may be drafted in like the second round. So you look at these positions, players at the wide receiver position, and you can see that the Steelers may be focused a little bit more on that, kind of in the middle rounds, maybe second round, third round of this year's NFL draft. So that's kind of the recap at the wide receiver position and what I would expect the Steelers to do early on there. Looking at the tight end position, they aren't really too focused on that position either. Maybe later on in the draft, maybe not even at all. You never know, because they don't really need a tight end unless they draft one because they know Pat Freiermuth is up for an extension next year, and if he's not back, maybe they select tight end. You never know at that position. But that's kind of the recap there. But looking at the offense line, you could tell that they're really focused on that, and they interviewed with some of the top guys there. Like, for example, they met with Amarius Mims, which was a formal interview, and he's projected to go in the first round, very early in the first round too. He may even be the Steelers selection at the 20th pick. Who knows? It's been a lot of projection that he may be going to the Steelers, and that's a perfect fit for them, and Andy Weidl, and that's a perfect Andy Weidl type of offensive tackle. So they also met with some other players who are obviously top tier prospects on the offensive line, and they also met with a lot of people on the offensive line. So you could tell that that was a main focus of them going into the combine, meeting with these players. And just remember, if the Steelers didn't meet with a certain player at the NFL combine, that doesn't mean that they're not showing interest in them. That means that there's still a pro day to be had. Meaning when they hold their individual workouts at their school and the Pittsburgh Steelers go and visit their school, go and visit them, they'll get even a closer look at them. These players have to meet with a lot of teams, and sometimes they can't meet with every single team, every single coach from every single team. So at the pro day, if the Steelers meet with them, that's also going to be a formal interview. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, these are the players they met with. It seems as though there was a focus more on offense line and wide receivers in terms of the offense. And if you look at the quarterback position, who did they interview at the quarterback position? Do you guys remember? None. They didn't look at quarterback at all, meaning that the Pittsburgh Steelers are not going to be selecting a quarterback very early in this year's draft or even at all. Maybe, just maybe, they might select one very late, like the 7th round, like they did last season and the year before, but don't expect a quarterback. So if you expected a quarterback to be drafted to replace Kenny Pickett to be the starter, like some of you may be wanting someone from Oregon, that quarterback, or maybe Michael Penix, some top tier quarterback, don't expect it early on in this year's draft unless some guy just randomly falls to the Pittsburgh Steelers who no one expected to fall that far. But do not expect a quarterback in this year's draft very early on or even at all. So they did not meet with the quarterback, but they met with other positions like running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. Tomorrow, I'm going to cover the defense because they also met with a lot more defensive players than offensive players. Looking at the list, there's a way more defensive players that met with the Steelers than offensive players, especially at every single position. Every single position on defense kind of loaded up on interviews. But with that being said, this is every player the Pittsburgh Steelers met with, formal or informal at NFL Combine, that we know of on the offensive side of the ball. Also, like I said, formal interviews are the better interviews. Informal is kind of just they quickly meet with them, but formal interviews are which they actually have a sit down, maybe have lunch, and kind of talk over life and football and just get to know each other. But with that being said, this is every single player. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the players the Pittsburgh Steelers have met with on the offense side of the ball. Did you want them to meet with a certain player that they didn't meet with? Or are you happy with the players that they kind of interviewed and talked with? Also, which position do you believe the Steelers will go with high in the first, second round of this year's NFL draft? And do you believe he'll be on the offensive side of the ball? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about this list. And also, like I said at the beginning, don't forget to subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss out on updates like this. The draft is around the corner, free agency is around the corner, and it's being covered all by me. So if you never want to miss out on anything Pittsburgh Steelers and you want to stay updated, turn on notifications, subscribe, and also make sure you like this video. I'll see you guys all later. Till next time, I'm out. Peace.